I once heard an interview with Brad Bird, the director of The Incredibles and Iron Giant, Ratatouille. He's an animation director, and he's well thought of. I saw an interview with him, and someone asked him, why would you use animation? And he goes, that's easy, caricature. And I think that is a really good example. I think that's a really good answer because when you think of animation, animation is all of it's the world, but just exaggerated, right? The characters are exaggerated, the motions are exaggerated. Generally, the stories are exaggerated. Obviously, film is also exaggerated as far as the stories are concerned, but usually there's a succinctness to it that they're able to not only use storytelling, but use even more visual means in order to portray that story. So, generally speaking, animation really is just caricature. And I don't mean just what I'm going to discuss in a second, but in generally speaking, that's really what kind of is the definitive thing that kind of separates it from other mediums is that it is born from and, you know, hopes to be caricature. Okay, so caricature is obviously a pictorial, written, or acted representation of a person which exaggerates the characteristics for a comedic, basically, effect. Okay. In the past, caricature from its very early times was very often used for political cartoons. So if you go way, 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 way back when, I mean, even if you look at like some of the paintings that like the Renaissance people would do, um, they sort of caricatured the kings and queens and things of the time. But that kind of when they went into print, they continued that, and it became sort of a tradition. And even in countries such as like Britain, which might be a little more reserved, they would do pretty great exaggerations and caricatures of the people in high places. So, that obviously has continued on just in general cartoons, right? Just your normal newspaper strips. Those don't really exist anymore, but so on and so forth. But also for animated features. So when we are looking at a caricature, it should do certain things. First and foremost, it has to be a likeness. Otherwise, what's the point, right? You got to be able to tell what it is. There should be exaggeration, right? That's almost the defining feature of the caricature is that you are exaggerating elements of it. And then the last one is a statement. So caricature is an art form, right? So the idea is that when I draw a bear or you draw a bear, they will be different because of who we are, right? Both by our skill set, how we view bears, how we're trying to represent the bears, right? So we are making commentary. Otherwise, we could just show a photo of a bear. But by me instinctively creating the graphic of the bear, I am saying something about the bear from my perspective. Even if we're both looking at the same bear and we're both drawing it as close to realistic as possible, we are still technically drawing it from our perspective. Even if we're both taking photos of the bear, you take a photo, I take a photo, I'm literally showing you what I see, right? So just the way that I take the photo itself is having some sort of commentary or editorial. I'm saying something about it. Okay. Your drawings generally should as well. That's why whenever I talk about like creating artwork, it should be centered on what you know, what's important to you, the things around you. Um, so when you are doing those things, that's typically what you want. If you can help it, the exaggeration should be part of the statement, right? Like you're trying to like if you have a person and you want to make them look like if we were doing Trump, right? They whenever you see caricature, you can argue what they do with all the rest of it, but they always do the hair real wild, right? Because he's got like that his like fluffy hair, it's like cotton candy hair. That's just one of those things, right? You can see they also do the tie thing, so they'll exaggerate certain things. Um, so depending on who you're doing, you'll see certain things. Okay. So if you can do a caricature in a way that says something about the person underneath, not just, physically, that's obviously even better because now you're really, getting farther into it. What we want to avoid is caricature like this. If you've ever gone to like a carnival or something, or you go to a touristy location, they'll have people on the boardwalk and they're doing caricatures and they'll do you and your significant other and they're like, "Oh, look at," and they look terrible. They draw big heads and then they do an okay likeness, but it doesn't say anything about you. If you look at it, if you were to like if you were to quickly look at this one, then quickly look at this one, you'd be like, that's the same person, right? They all kind of look the same. There's slight differences, but overall, the head shapes, the eye, everything, they're kind of the same. There's slight variation. They're probably reasonably good likenesses, but there's very little design, and the exaggeration is just one thing. Like it's just they it's that whole thing I was talking about with style. Like they just draw the head shape kind of a certain way, and they kind of do the same thing. That's what you want to avoid. So sometimes when people say caricature, they'll very often mean this. This is what you don't want to do for caricature. A better example is this. Now, I love Shrek. Everybody loves Shrek. But in the early DreamWorks animated features, um, uh, especially the early ones, but even to some extent, even now, um, the designs were sort of generic-y and almost caricature-like, like in this traditional carnival style. If you look at these characters, they're all kind of the same. There's not like a lot of exaggeration across the entire shape of the character. They would merely just kind of change some things. But if you were to look at these characters from 20 feet away in silhouette, you wouldn't really be able to distinct one from another. Obviously, some you could, because like donkey is looks like a donkey. But you know, if I asked you, if I looked at her and then we looked at one of them, I don't think you'd be able to tell which one was which. It's very difficult. Shrek has some elements, you know, his overall form isn't too bad. There is some exaggeration on him. But for the most part, they're not really pushing the entirety of the form. They're just kind of doing that same kind of style. And there's the animations that I really liked, like Shrek, like How to Train Your Dragon. And I really liked those. I even liked the second one better. But I remember when I first saw the trailer, I kind of was turned off. I'm like, I don't really like the look of this. It looks like kind of like crappy DreamWorks. The story is very good, you know, and it was handled very well. Um, but you know, the actual design itself in the beginning, you can see they adapted as time went on. Like each one got a little bit more caricature. Um, was sort of generic, and that's not what you want. As opposed to who I felt did 3D characters. Um, they were the first ones to do humans well was in the Incredibles, Pixar. If you look at their earlier work when they did humans, like Toy Story, they again were generic and not good looking. But Toy Story, or I'm sorry, Incredibles, they sort of figured it out. What you'll notice is that the entire form, right, the entire shape, the silhouette. If I take the heads off of all of these characters, you would still know which one's which. A character should not be defined by one element, right? So a lot of times you'll see this is one of the issues I have often with like anime, the mainstream anime stuff, not like the nuanced, like more artistic ones. Those ones have great design, but the mainstream ones, and you can make the same argument with Americans, but anime tends to have a kind of a style that they all abide by. Um, if you look at the bodies of one anime character to another anime character, if you took the heads off, you would not know who they were. And actually, I'll go one further. You can leave the heads. If you shave the heads of all the anime characters, you won't be able to distinct what one is from another one. It's just their hair shapes they generally change, and then you know they're not as great. But if you look at these, they whole bodies are being adapted and changed, and they say something about each of the characters themselves. Um, yeah, anyway, so they were this is like example of what you don't want to do, more example you want to do. You want to carry it across the entirety of the figure. Um, so when you do caricature, obviously the first thing you're going to do is try you're going to do observation, right? Like with any sort of drawing, you want to try and look for elements, things that are distinct that you can exaggerate. I probably said this before, but um you will probably find when you find your significant other, if the person you decide to love and cherish forever, I hope that you find something like that. Unless you don't want to, then good, don't. But if you were to find one, you'll find that very often the things that you find more attractive about them end up being, I would say, you know, quotes, their imperfections, the thing that separate them from other people, not the perfect human, whatever. Like they might have like a long nose. You'll suddenly like long noses, or they'll have um like my wife has freckles. Like I like freckles now. It's one of those things that you'll start to find. And so what you want to do is when you look at something you're trying to caricature, whether it be an animal or a person, you want to try and find what is the thing that is distinctly them, and then basically push that farther to make it even more them. I'm not really a very good caricature artist. That's not really my area of expertise. Um, You can see I didn't do necessarily the greatest job here, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm saying. Also, when you do the exaggerations, you can choose how you do it. So these are both horses, right? But what you exaggerate can totally change like the differences about them. This one you can see would be slow. I picture it just clopping along, right? As opposed to this one, which would be pretty quick, although it looked like it would be probably a little bit lumbering, right? Like an adolescent kind of feel to it. Um, so it kind of depends on how you exaggerate can change things. Also, what I would even make a larger argument about is be unique, right? Now, with all design, you want to be novel. Novelty is king. But what you don't want to do when you do your exaggerations is exaggerate the obvious things. So, for example, if I were to ask you what makes a frog, you might say big eyes, green skin, long legs, saying ribbit. I don't know. If you look at all these designs, these are all frogs, but they don't all have, well, this is toad. Um, they all have different elements, but they don't have all of the elements. So like some of these don't have big eyes. Some of them don't have long legs. Some of them aren't green, right? Um, so if you can find a way of representing, because it's like this is just part of being outside the box. If you can find a way of representing and exaggerating a feature of an animal that maybe isn't necessarily the most obvious feature, but still make it have the likeness of it, that'll be far more visually interesting and arguably appealing um, than something that has been treaded many times, right? So if I asked you to do a frog design, even if you asked me, I probably would do something that would be very stereotypical. But if I could find a way to create that frog and caricature it in a way that hasn't been done before, like don't give them huge legs, I think that that would be far more interesting, and I think people would appreciate it more.